you're going to put it up here, and the first drop down is where you hit. It'll stop.
It stop automatically, and then I just turn on off the mics, and that's it.
Yeah, you turn off the mics, but you got to hit this one little thing, this little box right there to stop it.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Okay, so there are three things.
Yep, there are three things. Okay.
Okay.
And then we're gonna put the mic back in, and when you're ready.
Sorry.
It's okay.
This is the Southeastern North Carolina Radio Reading Service, a United Way partner agency. We welcome you to its program entitled Off the Bookshelf. Your reader is Hiba Hal, and I will be reading The Kite Runner written by Khalid Hussein. We stopped last night with Hassan undergoing a surgery for his lip. Amir also wrote his first short story. We also got introduced to the terrible Asif and his friends Wali and Kamal. Chapter 6. Winter. Here is what I do on the first day of snowfall every year. I step out of the house early in the morning, still in my pajamas, hugging my arms against the chill. I find the driveway. My father's car, the walls, the trees, the rooftops, the hills buried under a foot of snow. I smile. The sky is seamless and blue. The snow is so white my eyes burn. I shovel a handful of the fresh snow into my mouth. Listen to the muffled stillness broken only by the cawing of crows. I walk down the front steps, barefoot, and call for Hassan to come out and see. Winter was every kid's favorite season in Kabul, at least those whose fathers could afford to buy a new, good iron stove. The reason was simple. They shut down school for the icy season. Winter to me was the end of long division and naming the capital of Bulgaria, and the start of 3 months of playing cards by the stove with Hassan, free Russian movies on Tuesday mornings at Cinema Park, sweet turnip, kuarma, over rice for lunch after a morning of building snowmen. And kites, of course, flying kites and running them. For a few unfortunate kids, winter did not spell the end of the school year. There was the so-called voluntary winter courses. No kid I knew ever volunteered to go to these classes. Parents, of course, did the volunteering for them. Fortunately for me, Baba was not one of them. I remember one kid, Ahmed, who lived across the street from us. His father was some kind of doctor, I think. Ahmed had epilepsy and always wore a wool vest and thick black-rimmed glasses. He was one of Asif's regular victims. Every morning I watched from my bedroom window as their Hazara servant shoveled snow from the driveway, cleared the way for the black Opel. I made a point of watching Ahmed and his father get into the car. Ahmed in his wool vest and winter coat. His school bag was filled with books and pencils. I waited until they pulled away, turned their corner. Then I slipped back into my bed in my flannel pajamas. I put the blanket to my chin and watched the snow-capped hills in the north through the window. Watched them until I drifted back to sleep. I loved wintertime in Kabul. I loved it for the soft pattering of snow against the window at night, for the way fresh snow crunched under my black rubber boots, for the warmth of the cast iron stove as the wind screeched through the yards, the streets. But mostly because as the trees froze and ice sheathed the roads, the chill between Baba and me thawed a little. And the reason for that was the kites. Baba and I lived in the same house, but in different spheres of existence. Kites were the one paper-thin slice of intersection between those spheres. Every winter, districts in Kabul held a kite fighting tournament. And if you were a boy living in Kabul, the days of the tournament were undeniably the highlight of the cold season. I never slept the night before the tournament. I drove from side to side, make shadow animals on the wall, even sit on the balcony in the dark, a blanket wrapped around me. I felt like a soldier trying to sleep in the trenches the night before a major battle. And that wasn't so far off in Kabul. Fighting kites was a little like going to war. As with any war, you had to ready yourself for the battle. For a while, Hassan and I used to build our own kites. We saved our weekly allowances in the fall, dropped the money in a little porcelain horse Baba had brought me one time from Herat. When the winds of winter began to blow and snow fell in chunks, we undid the snap under the horse's belly. We went to the bazaar and bought bamboo, glue, string, and paper. We spent hours every day shaving bamboo for the center and crossbars, cutting the thin tissue paper, which made for easy dipping and recovery. And then, of course, we had to make our own string or tar. If the kite was the gun, then tar, the glass-coated cutting line, was the bullet in the chamber. We'd go out in the yard and feed up to 500 feet of string through a mixture of ground glass and glue. We'd then hang the line between the trees, leave it to dry. The next day, we'd wind the battle-ready line around a wooden spool. By the time the snow melted and the rains of spring swept in, every boy in Kabul bore telltale horizontal gashes on his fingers from a whole winter of fighting kites. I remember how my classmates and I used to huddle, compare our battle scars on the very first day of school. The cuts stung, and we didn't heal for a couple of weeks, but I didn't mind. They were reminders of a beloved season that had once again passed too quickly. Then the class captain would blow his whistle, and we'd march in a single file to our classrooms, longing for winter already, greeted instead by the specter of yet another long school year. But it quickly became apparent that Hassan and I were better kite fighters than kite makers. Some flaw or other in our design always spelled its doom. So Baba started taking us to Saifo's to buy our kites. Saifo was a nearly blind old man who was a muchi by profession, a shoe repairman. But he was also the most famous kite maker, working out in a tiny hovel on Jade Maiwan, the crowded street south of the muddy banks of the Kabul River. I remember you had to crouch to enter the prison cell-sized store, and then had to lift a trapdoor to creep down a set of wooden steps to the dank basement where Saifo stored his coveted kites. Baba would buy us each 3 identical kites and spools of glass string. If I changed my mind and asked for a bigger or fancier kite, Baba would buy it for me, but then he'd buy it also for Hassan. Sometimes I wished he wouldn't do that, wished he'd let me be the favorite. The kite fighting tournament was an old winter tradition in Afghanistan. It started early in the morning of the day of the contest and didn't end until only the winning kite flew in the sky. I remember one year the tournament outlasted daylight. People gathered on sidewalks and roofs to cheer for their kids. The streets filled with kite runners, jerking and tugging on their lines, squinting up to the sky, trying to gain position to cut the opponent's line. Every kite fighter had an assistant, in my case Hassan, who held the spool and fed the line. One time, a bratty Hindi kid whose family had recently moved into the neighborhood told us that in his hometown, kite fighting had strict rules and regulations. You have to play in a boxed area, and you have to stand at a right angle to the wind, he said proudly. And you can't use aluminum to make your glass string. Hassan and I looked at each other, cracked up. The Hindi kid would soon learn what the British learned earlier in the century, and what the Russians would eventually learn by the late 1980s, that Afghans are an independent people. Afghans cherish custom but abhor rules, and so it was with kite fighting. The rules were simple. No rules. Fly your kite, cut the opponents, good luck. Except that wasn't all. The real fun began when a kite was cut. That was where the kite runners came in. Those kids who chased the wind-blown kite, drifting through the neighborhoods until it came spiraling down in a field, dropping in someone's yard, on a tree, or a rooftop. The chase got pretty fierce. Hordes of kite runners swarmed the streets, shoved past each other like those people from Spain. I dread about once. The ones who ran from the bulls. One year, a neighborhood kid climbed a pine tree for a kite. A branch snapped under his weight, and he fell 30 feet, broke his back, and never walked again. But he fell with the kite in his hands, and when a kite runner had his hands on a kite, no one could take it from him. That wasn't a rule, that was custom. For the kite runners, the most coveted prize was the last falling kite of a winter tournament. It was a trophy of honor, something to be displayed on a mantle for guests to admire. When the sky cleared, the kites, only the final two remained, every kite runner readied himself for the chance to land this prize. He positioned himself at a spot where he thought would give him a head start. Tense muscles readied themselves to uncoil. Next crane, ice crinkled, fights broke out, and when the last kite was cut, all hell broke loose. Over the years, I had seen a lot of guys run kites, but Hassan was by far the greatest kite runner I've ever seen. It was downright eerie the way he always got to spot the kite would land before the kite did, as if he had some sort of inner compass. I remember one overcast winter day, Hassan and I were running a kite. I was chasing him through neighborhoods, hopping gutters, weaving through narrow streets. I was a year older than him, but Hassan ran faster than I did, and I was falling behind. "Hassan, wait!" I yelled, my breathing hot and racked. He whirled around, motioned with his hand. "This way," he called before dashing around another corner. I looked up, saw that the direction we were running was opposite to the one the kite was drifting. "We're losing it! We're going the wrong way!" I cried out. "Trust me," I heard him call up ahead. I reached the corner and saw Hassan bolting along, his head down, not even looking at the sky, sweat soaking through the back of his shirt. I tripped over a rock and fell. I wasn't just slower than Hassan, but clumsier too. I'd always envied his natural and athleticism. When I staggered to my feet, I caught a glimpse of Hassan disappearing around another street corner. I hobbled after him, spikes of pain battering my scraped knees. I saw we had ended up on a rutted dirt road near Istiklal Middle School. There was a field on one side where lettuce grew in the summer, and a row of sour cherry trees on the other. I found Hassan sitting cross-legged at the foot of one of the trees, eating from a fistful of dried mulberries. "What are we doing here?" I panted, my stomach roiling in nausea. He smiled. "Sit with me, Amir Agha." I dropped next to him, lay on a thin patch of snow, wheezing. "You're wasting our time. It was going the other way, didn't you see it?" Hassan popped a mulberry in his mouth. "It's coming," he said. I could hardly breathe, and he didn't even sound tired. "How do you know?" I said. "I know." "How can you know?" He turned to me. A few sweat beads rolled from his bald scalp. "Would I ever lie to you, Amir Agha?" Suddenly, I decided to toy with him a little. I don't know, would you? I'd sooner eat dirt, he said, with a look of indignation. Really? You'd do that? He threw me a puzzled look. Do what? Eat dirt if I told you to, I said. I knew I was being cruel, like when I taunt him if he didn't know about some big word. But there was something fascinating, albeit in a sick way, about teasing Hassan. Kind of like when we used to play insect torture. Except now he was the ant, and I was holding the magnifying glass. His eyes searched my face for a long time. We sat there, two boys under a sour cherry tree, suddenly really looking at each other. That's when it happened again. Hassan's face changed. Maybe not changed, not really, but suddenly I had the feeling I was looking at two faces, the one I knew, and the one that was my first memory, and another, second face. This one lurking just beneath the surface. I'd seen it happen before. It always shook me a little. It just appeared, this other face, for a fraction of a moment, long enough to leave me with the unsettling feeling that maybe I'd seen it someplace before. Then Hassan blinked, and it was just him again, just Hassan. If you asked, I would, he finally said, looking right at me. I dropped my eyes. To this day, I find it hard to gaze directly at people like Hassan, people who mean every word they say. But I wonder, he added, would you ever ask me to do such thing? I mean Allah. And just like that, he had thrown at me his own little test. If I was going to toy with him and challenge his loyalty, then he'd toy me, test my integrity. I wished I hadn't started this conversation. I forced a smile. Don't be stupid, Hassan. You know I wouldn't. Hassan returned the smile, except that his didn't look forced. I know, he said, and that's the thing about people who mean everything they say. They think everyone else does too. Here it comes, Hassan said, pointing to the sky. He rose to his feet and walked a few paces to the left. I looked up, saw the kite plummeting towards us. I heard footfalls, shouts, and approaching melee of kite runners, but they were wasting their time because Hassan stood with his arms wide open, smiling, waiting for the kite, and may God, if he exists, that is, strike me blind if the kite didn't just drop into his open, outstretched arms. In the winter of 1975, I saw Hassan run a kite for the last time. Usually, each neighborhood held its own competition, but that year, the tournament was going to be held in my neighborhood, Wazir Akbar Khan, and several other districts, Karte Shar, Karte Paiwan, Mekri Rayan, and Kote Sangi, had been invited. You could hardly go anywhere without hearing talk of the upcoming tournament. Word had it this was going to be the biggest tournament in 25 years. One night that winter, with the big contest only 4 days away, Baba and I sat in his study, in overstuffed leather chairs by the glow of the fireplace. We were sipping tea, talking. Ali had served dinner earlier, potatoes and curried cauliflowers over rice, and had retired for the night with Hassan. Baba was fattening his pipe, and I was asking him to tell the story about the winter. A pack of wolves had descended from the mountains in Herat and forced everyone to stay indoors for a week, when he lit a match and said, casually, I think maybe you'll win the tournament this year. What do you think? I didn't know what to think or what to say. Was that what it would take? Had he just slipped me a key? I was a good kite fighter, actually a very good one. A few times, I'd even come close to winning the winter tournament. Once, I'd made it to the final 3. But coming close wasn't the same as winning, was it? Baba hadn't come close. He had won because winners won and everyone else just went home. Baba was used to winning at everything he set his mind to. Didn't he have the right to expect the same from his son? And just imagine if I did win. Baba smoked his pipe and talked. I pretended to listen, but I couldn't listen, not really, because Baba's casual little comment had planted a seed in my head. The resolution that I would win that winter storm. I was going to win. There was no other viable option. I was going to win, and I was going to run the last kite. Then I'd bring it home and show it to Baba. Show him once and for all that his son was worthy. Then maybe my life as a ghost in that house would finally be over. I let myself dream. I imagined conversation and laughter over dinner instead of silence broken only by the clinking of silverware and the occasional grunt. I envisioned us taking a Friday drive in Baba's car to Batman, stopping on the way at Garga Lake for some fried trout and potatoes. We'd go to the zoo and see Marjan the lion, and maybe Baba wouldn't yawn and steal looks at his wristwatch all the time. Maybe Baba would even read one of my stories. I'd write him 100 if I thought he'd read one. Maybe he'd call me Amir Jan, like Rahim Khan did. And maybe, just maybe, I would finally be pardoned for killing my mother. Baba was telling me about the time he'd cut 14 kites on the same day. I smiled, nodded, laughed at the right places, but I hardly heard a word he said. I had a mission now, and I wasn't going to fail Baba, not this time. It snowed heavily the night before the tournament. Hassan and I sat under the kursi and played Panjabar, and as wind rattled the tree, branches tapped on the window. Earlier that day, I asked Ali to set up the kursi for us, which was basically an electric heater under a low table covered with a thick quilted blanket. Around the table, he arranged mattresses and cushions, so as many as 20 people could sit and slip their legs under. Hassan and I used to spend entire snowy days snug under the kursi, playing chess, cards, mostly Panjabai. I killed Hassan's 10 diamonds, played him all 2 jacks and a 6. Next door, in Baba's study, Baba and Rahim Khan were discussing business with a couple of other men. One of them I recognized as Asif's father. Through the wall, I could hear the scratchy sound of Radio Kabul news. Hassan killed the 6 and picked up the jacks. On the radio, Dawood Khan was announcing something about foreign investments. He says someday we'll have the television in Kabul. I said, who? Dawood Khan, you asked. The president. Hassan giggled. I heard they already have it in Iran, he said. I sighed. Those Iranians. For a lot of Hazaras, Iran represented a sanctuary of sorts. I guessed because, like Hazaras, most Iranians were Shia Muslims. But I remembered something my teacher had said about this summer about Iranians, that they were grinning, smooth talkers who patted you on the back with one hand and picked your pocket with the other. I told Baba about that, and he said my teacher was one of those jealous Afghans, jealous because Iranians was a rising power in Asia, and most people around the world couldn't even find Afghanistan on the world map. It hurts to say that, he said, shrugging, but better to hurt by the truth than comforted with a lie. I'll buy you one someday, I said. Hassan's face brightened. A television, in truth? Sure. And not the black and white one kind either. We'll probably be grown-ups by then, but I'll get us 2. One for you and one for me. I'll put it on my table where I keep my drawings, Hassan said. His sayings that made me kind of sad. Sad for who Hassan was, where he lived, for how he'd accepted the fact that he'd grown up old in that mud shack in the yard, the way his father had. I drew the last card, played him a pair of queens and a 10. Hassan picked up the queens. You know, I think you're going to make Agha Sahab very proud tomorrow. You think so? Inshallah, he said. Inshallah, I echoed, though the God-willing qualifier didn't sound as sincere coming from my lips. That was the thing with Hassan. He was so goddamn pure. So always felt like a phony around him. So he always felt like a phony around him. I killed his king and played with him my final card, the ace of spades. He had to pick it up. I'd won, but as I shuffled for a new game, I had the distinct suspicion that Hassan had let me win. Amir Agha, what? You know, I like where I live. He was always doing that, reading my mind. It's my home. Whatever, I said. Get ready to lose again. Chapter 7. The next morning, as he brewed black tea for breakfast, Hassan told me he'd had a dream. We were at Garga Lake, you and me, Father Agha Sahib, Rahim Khan, and thousands of other people, he said. It was warm and sunny, and the lake was clear like a mirror. But no one was swimming because they said a monster had come to the lake. It was swimming at the bottom, waiting. He poured me a cup and added sugar, blew in it a few times, put it before me. So everyone's scared to get into the water. And suddenly you kick off your shoes, Amir Agha, and take off your shirt. There's no monster, you say. I'll show you all. And before anyone can stop you, you dive into the water. Start swimming away. I follow you in, and we're both swimming. But you can't swim, Hassan laughed. It's a dream, Amir Agha. You can do anything. Anyway, everyone was screaming, get out, get out. But we just swim in the cold water. We make it way out into the middle of the lake, and we stop swimming. We turn towards the shore and wave to the people. They look like small ants, but we can hear them clapping. They see now. There's no monster, just water. They changed the name of the lake after that and called it the Lake of Amir and Hassan, Sultans of Kabul. And we get to charge people money for swimming in it. So what does it mean? I said. He coated my naan with marmalade, placed it on a plate. I don't know. I was hoping you could tell me. Well, it's a dumb dream. Nothing happens in it. Father says dreams always mean something. I sipped some tea. Why don't you ask him then? He's so smart, I said, more correctly than I had intended. I hadn't slept all night. My neck and back were like coiling springs, and my eyes stung. Still, I had been mean to Hassan. I almost apologized, then didn't. Hassan understood I was just nervous. Hassan always understood about me. Upstairs, I could hear the water running in Baba's bathroom. The streets glistened with fresh snow, and the sky was a blameless blue. Snow blanketed every rooftop and weighed on the branches of the stunned mulberry trees that lined our street. Overnight, snow had nudged its way onto every crack and gutter. I squinted against the blinding white when Hassan and I stepped through the wrought iron gates. Ali shut the gates behind us. I heard him mutter a prayer under his breath. He always did a prayer when his son left the house. I had never seen so many people on our street. Kids were flinging snowballs, squabbling, chasing one another, giggling. Kite fighters were huddling with their spool holders, making last-minute preparations. From adjacent streets, I could hear laughter and chatter. Already, rooftops were jammed with spectators reclining in lawn chairs, hot tea steaming from their thermoses, and the music of Ahmad Zahir blaring from cassette players. The immensely popular Ahmad Zahir had revolutionized Afghan music and outraged the purists by adding electric guitars, drums, and horns to the traditional tabla and harmonium. On stage or at parties, he shirked the austere and nearly morose stance of older singers and actually smiled when he sang, sometimes even at women. I turned my gaze to our rooftop, found Baba and Rahim Khan sitting on a bench, both dressed in wool sweaters, sipping tea. Baba waved. I couldn't tell if he was waving at me or at Hassan. We should get started, Hassan said. He wore black rubber snow boots and a bright green chapan over a thick sweater and faded corduroy pants. Sunlight washed over his face, and in it I saw how well the pink scar above his lip had healed. Suddenly I wanted to withdraw, pack it all in, go back home. What was I thinking? Why was I putting myself through this, when I already knew the outcome? Baba was on the roof, watching me. I felt his glare on me like the heat of a blistering sun. This would be failure on a grand scale, even for me. I'm not sure I want to fly a kite today, I said. It's a beautiful day, Hassan said. I shifted on my feet, trying to peel my gaze away from our rooftop. I don't know, maybe we should go home. Then he stepped towards me and, in a low voice, said something that scared me a little. Remember, Amir Alva, there's no monster, just a beautiful day. How could I be such an open book to him when half the time I had no idea what was miling around in his head? I was the one who went to school, the one who could read, write. I was the smart one. Hassan couldn't read a first grade textbook, but he'd read me plenty. That was a little unsettling, but also sort of comfortable to have someone who always knew what you needed. No monster, I said, feeling a little better, to my own surprise. He smiled. No monster. Are you sure? He closed his eyes, nodded. I looked to the kids scampering down the street, flinging snowballs. It is a beautiful day, isn't it? Let's fly, he said. It occurred to me then that maybe Hassan had made up his dream. Was that possible? I decided it wasn't. Hassan wasn't that smart. I wasn't that smart. But made up or not, the silly dream had lifted some of my anxiety. Maybe I should take my shirt off, take a swim in the lake. Why not? Let's do it, I said. Hassan's face brightened. Good, he said. He lifted our kite, red with yellow borders, and just beneath were the central and crossbars net, marked with Saifo's unmistakable signature. He licked his finger and held it up, tested the wind, then ran in its direction. On those rare occasions we flew kites in the summer, he'd kick up dust to see which way the wind blew. The spool rolled in my hands until Hassan stopped, about 50 feet away. He held the kite high over his head like an Olympic athlete showing his gold medal. I jerked the string twice, our usual signal, and Hassan tossed the kite. Caught between Baba and the mullahs at school, I still hadn't made up my mind about God. But when a Quran ayah I had learned in my religious class rose to my lips, I muttered it. I took a deep breath, exhaled, and pulled on the string. Within a minute, my kite was rocketing to the sky. It made a sound like a paper bird flapping its wings. Hassan clapped his hands, whistled, and ran back to me. I handed him the spool, holding on to the string, and he spun it quickly to roll the loose string back on. At least 24 kites already hung in the sky, like paper sharks roaming for prey. Within an hour, the number doubled. The red, blue, and yellow kites glided and spun in the sky. A cold breeze wafted through my hair. The wind was perfect for kite flying, blowing just hard enough to give some lift, make the sweeps easier. Next to me, Hassan held the spool, his hands already bloodied by the string. Soon, the cutting started, and the first of the defeated kites whirled out of control. They fell from the sky like shooting stars with brilliant, rippling tails, showering the neighborhoods below with prizes for the kite runners. I could hear the runners now, hollering as they ran the streets. Someone shouted reports of a fight breaking out 2 streets down. I kept stealing glances at Baba sitting with Rahim Khan on the roof, wondered what he was thinking. Was he cheering for me, or did a part of him enjoy watching me fail? That was the thing about kite flying. Your mind drifted with the kite. They were coming down all over the place now, the kites, and I was still flying. I was still flying. My eyes kept wandering over to Baba, bundled up in his wool sweater. Was he surprised I had lasted as long as I had? You don't keep your eyes to the sky, you won't last much longer. I snapped my gaze back to the sky. A red kite was closing in on me. I'd caught it just in time. I tangled a bit with it, ended up busting him when he became impatient and tried to cut me from below. Up and down the streets, kite runners were returning triumphantly, their captured kites held high. They showed them to their parents, their friends, but they all knew the best one was yet to come. The biggest prize of all was still flying. I sliced a bright yellow kite with a coiled white tail. It caused me another gash on the index finger and blood trickled down my palm. I had Hassan hold the string and suck the blood dry. I blotted my finger against my jeans. Within another hour, the number of surviving kites dwindled from maybe 50 to a dozen. I was one of them. I'd made it to the last dozen. I knew this part of the tournament would take a while, because the guys who had lasted this long were good. They wouldn't easily fall into simple traps like the old lift and dive, Hassan's favorite trick. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, tufts of clouds had drifted in, and the sun had slipped behind them. Shadows started to lengthen. The spectators on the roofs bundled up in scarves and thick coats. We were down to a half dozen, and I was still flying. My legs ached, and my neck was stiff. But with each defeated kite, hope grew in my heart, like snow collecting on a wall, one flake at a time. My eyes kept returning to a blue kite that had been wreaking havoc for the last hour. How many has he cut? I asked. I counted 11, Hassan said. Do you know whose it might be? Hassan clucked his tongue and tipped his chin. That was a trademark. Hassan's gesture meant he had no idea. The blue kite sliced a big purple one and swept twice in big loops. 10 minutes later, he'd cut another 2, sending hordes of kite runners racing after them. After another 30 minutes, only 4 kites remained, and I was still flying. It seemed I could hardly make a wrong move, as if every gust of wind blew in my favor. I'd never felt so in command, so lucky. It felt intoxicating. I didn't dare look up at the roof, didn't dare take my eyes off the sky. I had to concentrate, play it smart. Another 15 minutes, and what had seemed like a laughable dream that morning had suddenly become reality. It was just me and another guy, the blue kite. The tension in the air was as taut as the glass string I was tugging with my bloody hands. People were stomping their feet, clapping, whistling, chanting, "Boborish, Boborish, cut him, cut him." I wondered if Baba's voice was one of them. Music blasted, the smell of steamed mantu and fried pakora drifted from rooftops and open doors. But all I willed myself to hear, was the thudding of blood in my head. All I saw was the blue kite. All I smelled was victory, salvation, redemption. If Baba was wrong, and there was a God, like they said in school, then he'd let me win. I didn't know what the other guy was planning for, maybe just bragging rights. But this was my one chance to become someone who was looked at, not seen, listened to, not heard. If there was a God, he'd guide the wind, let them blow for me so that, with a tug of my string, I'd cut loose my pain, my longing. I'd endured so much, come too far. And suddenly, just like that, hope became knowledge. I was going to win. It was just a matter of when. It turned out to be sooner than later. A gust of wind lifted my kite, and I took advantage. Fed the string, pulled up, looped my kite on top of the blue one. I held position. The blue kite knew it was in trouble. It was trying desperately to maneuver out of the jam, but I didn't let go. I held position. The crowd sensed the end was at hand. The chorus of cut him, grew louder, like Romans chanting for the gladiators to kill. You're almost there, Amir Alpha, almost there, Hassan was panting. Then the moment came. I closed my eyes and loosened my grip on the string. It sliced my finger again as the wind dragged it, and then I didn't need to hear the crowd's roar to know. I didn't need to see either. Hassan was screaming, and his arm was wrapped around my neck. Bravo, bravo, Amir Alpha. I opened my eyes, saw the blue kite spinning wildly like a tire come loose from a speeding car. I blinked, tried to say something. Nothing came out. Suddenly I was hovering, looking down on myself from above. Black leather coat, red scarf, faded jeans, a thin boy, a little sallow, and a tad short for his 12 years. He had narrow shoulders and a hint of dark circles around his pale hazel eyes. The breeze rustled his little brown hair. He looked up to me, and we smiled to each other. Then I was screaming, and everything was color and sound. Everything was alive and good. I was throwing my free arm around Hassan, and we were hopping up and down, both of us laughing, both of us weeping. You won, Amir Alpha, you won. We won, was all I could say. This wasn't happening. In a moment, I'd blink and rouse from this beautiful dream, get out of bed, march down to the kitchen to eat breakfast with no one to talk to but Hassan, get dressed, wait for Baba, give up, back to my old life. Then I saw Baba on our roof. He was standing on the edge, pumping both of his fists, hollering and clapping, and that right there was the single greatest moments of my 12 years of life. Seeing Baba on that roof, proud of me at last. But he was doing something now, motioning with his hand in an urgent way. Then I understood. Hassan, I know, he said, breaking our embrace. Inshallah, we'll celebrate later. Right now, I'm going to run that blue kite for you, he said. He dropped the spool and took off running. The hem of his green champagne dragging in the snow behind him. Hassan, I called, come back with it. He was already turning the street corner, his rubber boots kicking up the snow. He stopped, turned. He cupped his hands around his mouth. For you, 1,000 times over, he said. Then he smiled, his Hassan smile, and disappeared around the corner. The next time I saw him smiled, unabashedly, like that, was 26 years later, in a faded Polaroid photograph. I began to pull my kite back as people rushed to congratulate me. I shook hands with them, said my thanks. The younger kids looked at me with an awestruck twinkle in their eyes. I was a hero. Hands patted my back and tousled my hair. I pulled on the string and returned every smile, but my mind was on the blue kite. Finally, I had my kite in my hand. I wrapped the loose string that had collected at my feet around the spool, shook a few more hands, and trotted home. When I reached the wrought iron gates, Ali was waiting on the other side. He stuck his hand through the bars. Congratulations, he said. I gave him my kite and spool, shook his hand. Tashakkur, Ali Jan. I was praying for you the whole time. Then keep praying. We're not done yet. I hurried back to the street. I didn't ask Ali about Baba. I didn't want to see him yet. In my head, I had it all planned. I'd make a grand entrance, a hero, prize trophy in my bloodied hands. Heads would turn and eyes would lock. Rustam and Sohrab rising each other up. A dramatic moment of silence. Then the old warrior would walk to the young one, embrace him, acknowledge his worthiness, vindication, salvation, redemption, and then, well, Happily ever after, of course. What else? The streets of Wazir Akbar Khan were numbered and set at right angles to each other, like a grid. It was a new neighborhood then, still developing, with empty lots of land and half-constructed homes on every street, between compounds surrounded by 8-foot walls. I ran up and down every street looking for Hassan everywhere. People were busy folding chairs, packing food and utensils after a long day of partying. Some still sitting on their rooftops, shouting their congratulations to me. 4 streets south from ours, I saw Omar, the son of an engineer, who was a friend of Baba's. He was dribbling a soccer ball with his brother on the front lawn of their house. Omar was a pretty good guy. We'd been classmates in 4th grade, and one time he'd given me a fountain pen, the kind you had to load with a cartridge. I heard you won, Amir, he said. Congratulations. Thanks. Have you seen Hassan, your Hazara? I nodded. Omar handed the ball to his brother. I hear he's a great kite runner. His brother headed the ball back to him. Omar caught it, tossed it up and down. Although I've always wondered how he manages, with those tight little eyes. How does he see anything? His brother laughed, a short burst, and asked for the ball. Omar ignored him. Have you seen him? Omar flickered the thumb over his shoulder, pointing southwest. I saw him running towards the bazaar a while ago. Thanks, I scanned away. By the time I reached the marketplace, the sun had almost sunk behind the hills, and dusk had painted the sky pink and purple. A few blocks away from the Haji Yaqub Mosque, the mullah below azan, calling for the faithful to unroll their rugs and bow their heads whilst in prayer. Hassan never missed any of the 5 daily prayers. Even when we were out playing, he'd excuse himself, draw water from the well in the yard, wash up, and disappear into the hut. He'd come out a few minutes later, smiling, find me sitting against the wall or perched on a tree. He was going to miss prayer tonight, though, because of me. The bazaar was empty. It was emptying quickly, the merchants finishing up their haggling for the day. I trotted in the mud between rows of closely packed cubicles where you could buy a freshly slaughtered pheasant in one stand and the calculator from the adjacent one. I picked my way through the dwindling crowd. The lame beggars dressed in layers of tattered rags, the vendors with rugs on their shoulders, the cloth merchants, the butchers closing shop for the day. I found no sign of Hassan. I stopped by a dried fruit stand, described Hassan to an old merchant, loading his mule and with crates of pine seeds and raisins. He wore a powder blue turban. He paused to look at me for a long time before answering. I might have seen him. Which way did he go? He eyed me up and down. What is a boy like you doing here at this time of the day looking for a Hazara? His glance lingered admiringly on my leather coat and my jeans, cowboy pants we used to call them. In Afghanistan, owning anything American, especially if it wasn't second-hand, was a sign of wealth. I need to find him, Alpha. What is he to you? He said. I didn't see the point of his question, but I reminded myself that impatience wasn't going to make him tell me any faster. He's our servant's son, I said. The old man raised a pepper-gray eyebrow. He is. Lucky Hazara, having such a concerned master. His father should get on his knees, sweep dust at your feet with his eyelashes. Are you going to tell me or not? He rested an arm on the mule's back, pointed south. I think I saw the boy you described running that way. He had a kite in his hand, the blue one. He did? I said. For you, 1,000 times over, he had promised. Good old Hassan. Good old reliable Hassan. He'd kept his promise and run the last kite for me. Of course. They've probably caught him by now, the old merchant said, grunting the load and loading another box on the mule's back. Who? The other boys, he said. The ones chasing him. They were just like him. He glanced to the sky and sighed. Now run along. You're making me late for Nina's. But I was already scrambling down the lane. For the next few minutes, I scoured the bazaar in vain. Maybe the old merchant's eyes had betrayed him, except he'd seen the blue kite. The thought of getting my hands on that kite, I poked my head behind every lane, every shop, no sign of Hassan. I had begun to worry that darkness would fall before I found Hassan, when I heard voices from up ahead. I reached a secluded, muddy road. It ran perpendicular to the end of the main thoroughfare, bisecting the bazaar. I turned onto the rutted track and followed the voices. My boots squished in mud with every step, and my breath puffed out in white clouds before me. The narrow path ran parallel on one side to a snow-filled ravine through which a stream may have tumbled in the spring. To my other side stood rows of snow-burdened cypress trees, peppered among flat-topped clay houses. No more than mud shacks in most cases, separated by narrow alleys. I heard the voices again, louder this time, coming from one of the alleys. I crept close to the mouth of the alley, held my breath, peeked around the corner. Hassan was standing at the blind end of the alley, in a defiant stance, fists curled, legs tightly apart. Behind him, sitting on pads of scrap and rubble, was the blue kite, the key to Baba's heart. Blocking Hassan's way out of the alley were 3 boys, the same 3 boys from that day on the hill, the day after Dawood Khan's coup, when Hassan had saved us with a slingshot. Wali was standing on one side, Kamal on the other, and in the middle, Asif. I felt my body clench up, and something cold rippled up my spine. Asif seemed relaxed, confident. He was twirling his brass knuckles. The other 2 guys shifted nervously on their feet, looking from Asif to Hassan, like they'd cornered some kind of wild animal that only Asif could tame. Where's your slingshot, Hazara? Asif said, turning the brass knuckles in his hand. What was it you said? They'll have to call you One-Eyed Asif? That's right, One-Eyed Asif. That was clever, really clever. Then again, it's easy to be clever when you're holding a loaded weapon. I realized I still hadn't breathed out. I exhaled, slowly, quietly. I felt paralyzed. I watched them close in on the boy I'd grown up with, the boy whose hair-lipped face had been my first memory. But today is your lucky day, Hazara, Asif said. He had his back to me, but I would have bet he was grinning. I'm in a mood to forgive. What do you say to that, boys? That's generous, Kamal blurted, especially after the rude manners he showed us last time. He was trying to sound like Asif, except there was a tremor in his voice. Then I understood. He wasn't afraid of Hassan, not really. He was afraid because he had no idea what Asif had in mind. Asif waved a dismissive hand. Bakhshida, forgiven, it's done. His voice dropped a little. Of course, nothing's free in this world, and my pardon comes with a small price. That's fair, Kamal said. Nothing's free, Wali added. You're a lucky Hazara, Asif said, taking a step towards Hassan, because today, it's only going to cost you that blue kite. A fair deal, boys, isn't it? More than fair, Kamal said. Even from where I was standing, I could see the fear creeping into Hassan's eyes, but he shook his head. Amir Agha won the tournament, and I ran this kite for him. I ran it fairly. This is his kite. A loyal Hazara, loyal as a dog, Asif said. Kamal's laugh was a shrill, nervous sound. But before you sacrifice yourself for him, think about this. Would he do the same for you? Have you ever wondered why he never includes you in his games when he had guests? Why he only plays with you when no one else is around? I'll tell you why, Hazara, because to him, you're nothing but an ugly pet. Something he can play with when he's bored, something he can kick when he's angry. Don't ever fool yourself and think you're Something more. Amir Agha and I are friends, Hassan said. He looked flushed. Friends? Asif said, laughing. You pathetic fool. Someday you'll wake up from your little fantasy and learn just how good of a friend he is. Now bus. Enough of this. Give us that kite. Hassan stooped and picked up a rock. Asif flinched. He began to take a step back, stopped. Last chance, Hazara. Hassan's answer was to cock the arm that held the rock. Whatever you wish. Asif unbuttoned his winter coat, took it off, folded it slowly and deliberately. He placed it on the wall. I opened my mouth, almost said something, almost. The rest of my life might have turned out differently if I had, but I didn't. I just watched, paralyzed. Asif motioned with his hand, and the other two boys separated, forming a half circle, trapping Hassan in the alley. I've changed my mind, Asif said. I'm letting you keep the kite, Hazara. I let you keep it, so it will always remind you of what I'm about to do. Then he charged. Hassan hurled the rock. It struck Asif in the forehead. Asif yelped, and he flung himself at Hassan, knocking him to the ground. Walian and Kamal followed. I bit on my fist, shut my eyes. A memory. Did you know Hassan and you fed from the same breast? Did you know that Amir Agha? Sakina, her name was. She was a fair blue-eyed Hazara woman from Bamiyan, and she sang you old wedding songs. Did you know that a memory, a rupiah each, children, just 1 rupiah each, and I will part the curtain of truth. The old man sits against a mud wall. His sightless eyes are like molten silver embedded in deep, twinned craters. Hunched over his crane, a fortune teller runs a gnarled hand across the surface of his deflated cheeks, cups it before us. Not much to ask for the truth. Is it a rupiah each? Hassan drops a coin in the leathery palm. I drop mine too. In the name of Allah, most beneficent, most merciful. The old fortune teller whispers. He takes Hassan's hand first, strokes his palm with one horn like fingernail. Round and round, round and round. The finger then floats to Hassan's face and makes a dry, scratchy sound as it slowly traces the curves of his cheeks, the outline of his ears. The calloused pads of his fingers brush against Hassan's eyes. The hand stops here, lingers. A shadow passes across the old man's face. Hassan and I exchange a glance. The old man takes Hassan's hand and puts the rupiah back in Hassan's palm. He turns to me. How about you, young friend? He says. On the other side of the wall, a rooster crows. The old man reaches for my hand and I withdraw it. A dream. I am lost in a snowstorm. A wind shrieks, blows stinging sheets of snow into my eyes. I stagger through the layers of shifting white. I call for help, but the wind drowns my cries. I fall and lie, panting on the snow. Lost in the white, the wind wailing in my ears. I watch the snow erase my fresh footprints. I'm a ghost now. I think, a ghost with no footprints. I cry out again, hope fading like my footprints, but this time I muffled reply. I shield my eyes and manage to sit up. Out of the swaying curtains of snow, I catch a glimpse of movement, a flurry of color. A familiar shape materializes, a hand reaches out for me. I see deep parallel gashes across the palm, blood dripping, staining the snow. I take the hand, and suddenly the snow is gone. We're standing in a field of apple green grass with soft wisps of clouds drifting above. I look up and see the clear sky is filled with kites. Green, yellow, red, orange. They shimmer in the afternoon light. A havoc of scrap and rubble littered the alley. Worn bicycle tires, bottles with peeled labels, ripped up magazines, yellow newspapers, all scattered amid a pile of bricks and slabs of cement. A rusted cast iron stove with a gaping hole in its side, tilted against the wall. But there were two things amid the garbage that I couldn't stop looking at. One was the blue kite resting against the wall, close to the cast iron stove. The other was Hassan's brown corduroy pants, thrown on a heap of eroded bricks. I don't know what he was saying. My father says it's sinful. He sounded unsure, excited, scared, all at the same time. Hassan lay with his chest pinned to the ground. Kamal and Wali each gripped an arm, twisted and bent at the elbow, so that Hassan's hands were pressed to his back. Asif was standing over them, the heel of his snow boots crushing the back of Hassan's neck. Your father won't find out, Asif said, and there's nothing sinful about teaching a lesson to a disrespectful donkey. I don't know, Wali muttered. Suit yourself, Asif said, and he turned to Kamal. What about you? Well, it's just a hazara, Asif said, but Kamal kept looking away. Fine, Asif snapped. All I want you weaklings to do is hold him down. Can you manage that? Wali and Kamal nodded. They looked relieved. Asif knelt behind Hassan, put his hands on Hassan's hips. He lifted his bare buttocks. He kept one hand on Hassan's back and undid his own belt buckle with his free hand. He unzipped his jeans, dropped his underwear. He positioned himself behind Hassan. Hassan didn't struggle, didn't even whimper. He moved his head slightly, and I caught a glimpse of his face, saw that resignation in it. It was a look I had seen before. It was the look of a lamb. Tomorrow is the 10th day of Dhul Hijjah, the last month of a Muslim calendar, and the first of the 3 days of Eid al-Adha, or Eid al-Qurban as Afghanistan called it, a day to celebrate how the Prophet Ibrahim almost sacrificed his own son for God. Baba had hand-picked the sheep again this year, a powder white one with crooked black ears. We all stand in the backyard, Hassan, Ali, Baba, and I. The mullah recites his prayers, rubbed his beard. Baba mutters, get on with it, under his breath. He sounds annoyed with the endless praying, the ritual of making the meat halal. Baba mocks the story behind this Eid, like he mocks everything religious, but he respects the tradition of Eid al-Qurban. The custom is to divide the meat in thirds, one for the family, one for friends, and one for the poor. Every year, Baba gives it all to the poor. The rich are fat enough already, he says. The mullah finishes the prayers. He picks up the kitchen knife with a long blade, and the custom is not to let the sheep see the knife. Ali feeds the animal a cube of sugar, another custom to make death sweeter. The sheep kicks, but not too much. The mullah grabs it under its jaw and places the blade on its neck. Just a second before he slices the throat in one expert motion. I see the sheep's eyes. It is a look that will haunt my dreams for weeks. I don't know why I watch this yearly ritual in our backyard. My nightmares persist long after the bloodstains on the grass have faded. But I always watch. I watch because of that look of acceptance in the animal's eyes. Absurdly, I imagine the animal understands. I imagine the animal sees that its imminent demise is for a higher purpose. This is the look. I stopped watching, turned away from the alley. Something warm was running down my wrist. I blinked, saw I was still biting down on my fist hard, enough to draw blood from the knuckles. I realized something else. I was weeping from just around the corner. I could hear Asif's quick, rhythmic grunts. I had one last chance to make a decision, one final opportunity to decide who I was going to be. I could step into that alley, stand up for Hassan the way he'd stood up for me all those times in the past, and accept whatever would happen to me, or I could run. In the end, I ran. I ran because I was a coward. I was afraid of Asif and what he would do to me. I was afraid of getting hurt. That's what I told myself as I turned my back to the alley to Hassan. That's what I made myself believe. I actually aspired to cowardice. Because the alternative, the real reason I was running, was that Asif was right. Nothing was free in this world. Maybe Hassan was the price I had to pay, the lamb I had to slay to win Baba. Was it a fair price? The answer floated my conscious mind before I could thwart it. He was just a Hazara, wasn't he? I ran back the way I came, ran back to the all but deserted bazaar. I lurched to a cubicle. I leaned against the padlock, swinging doors. I stood there panting, sweating, wishing things had turned out some other way. About 15 minutes later, I heard voices and running footfalls. I crouched behind the cubicle and watched Asif and the other two springing by, laughing as they hurried down the deserted lane. I forced myself to wait 10 more minutes. Then I walked back to the rutted track that ran along the snow-filled ravine. I squinted in the dim light and spotted Hassan walking slowly toward me. I met him by a leafless birch tree on the end of the ravine. He had the blue kite in his hand. That was the first thing I saw. I can't lie now and say my eyes didn't scan for any rips. His shappan had mud smudges down the front of his shirt, was ripped just below the collar. He stopped, swayed on his feet like he was going to collapse. Then he steadied himself, handed me the kite. "Where were you?" "I looked for you," I said. Speaking those words was like chewing on a rock. Hassan dragged a sleeve across his face, whipped snot and tears. I waited for him to say something, but we just stood there in silence in the fading light. I was grateful for the early evening shadows that fell on Hassan's face and concealed mine. I was glad I didn't have to return his gaze. Did he know I knew? Or if he knew, then what would I see if I did look in his eyes? Blame? Indignation? Or, God forbid, what I feared most? Guileless devotion? That, most of all, I couldn't bear to see. He began to say something and his voice cracked. He closed his mouth, opened it and closed it again, took a step back, wiped his face, and that was as close as Hassan and I ever came to discussing what had happened in the alley. I thought he might burst into tears, but to my relief, he didn't, and I pretended I hadn't heard the crack in his voice, just like I pretended I hadn't seen the dark stain in the seat of his pants, or those tiny drops that fell from between his legs and stained the snow black. "Agha Sahib will worry," was all he said. He turned from me and limped away. It happened just the way I had imagined. I opened the door to the smoky study and stepped in. Baba and Rahim Khan were drinking tea and listening to the news crackling on the radio. Their heads turned. Then a smile played on my father's lips. He opened his arms. I put the kite down and rocked into his thick, hairy arms. I buried my face in the warmth of his chest and wept. Baba held me close to him, rocking me back and forth in his arms. I forgot what I had done, and that was good. This concludes our reading of The Kite Runner from Off the Bookshelf. Your reader has been Hiba Hart. Thank you.